When my father passed away, something in me broke. I was 25, living in a small apartment in Seattle, just trying to stay afloat in a job I didn't care about. The call came late at night. A heart attack, sudden and unforgiving. It was gone. Before I could say goodbye, 1 minute he was alive, laughing about how bad the Seahawks were doing that season. And the next, the silence swallowed everything. Grief isn't loud. It's a heavy, aching quiet that follows you everywhere. I flew home for the funeral, still numb, unsure of what I'd even say when I got there. All words are left when the one man who raised you taught you how to shave. How to throw a baseball, how to be a man is suddenly not there anymore. The funeral was small, almost too quiet. It's just a few close friends, some family, and her. Emily, my stepmother. She stood at the front wearing a simple black dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a loose bun, her hands shaking as she tried to keep herself from falling apart. She was only 12 years older than me, my dad's second wife. When he married her, I was 18 and bitter about the whole thing. I thought she was too young, too perfect, too much of everything. I hated the idea of someone replacing my mom, even though she'd been gone for years. But Emily never tried to replace anyone. She just stayed. She loved my father, even when he didn't make it easy. And slowly, over the years, I saw how much she really cared. She cooked for him, cared for him, laughed at his dumb jokes, and sat with him during his worst days. Maybe it took losing him to finally see her clearly. After the funeral, I planned to head back to Seattle and bury myself in work. But she stopped me. We were standing in the kitchen, just the two of us, the house too quiet without him. "You shouldn't be alone right now," she said, her voice soft, eyes red from crying. "Neither should you," I told her. She nodded slowly, and then she offered it, "Stay here." The house was too big for her now. She didn't say it outright, but I could feel it. She didn't want to face the nights alone. And truth be told, neither did I, so I stayed. At first, it felt like I was stepping back into a life I'd already left behind. The creak of the hardwood floors, the smell of old books and aftershave, the way the sunlight hit the kitchen table. In the mornings, it all brought Dad back in waves. But it wasn't just the house that haunted me. It was Emily. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, cleaning things that didn't need to be cleaned, folding laundry that wasn't hers, keeping busy because the stillness was too loud. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out the window, lost in thought, and other times I'd hear her crying through the walls late at night, her sobs muffled but aching. There was one night I couldn't sleep. I wandered downstairs to get some water and found her sitting at the kitchen table in one of Dad's old flannel shirts. She looked up at me, mascara smudged, her face pale, eyes tired. "I can't believe he's really gone," she said quietly. I didn't answer. I just nodded and walked over to her. She stood up slowly, and then without a word she stepped into me, wrapped her arms around my chest, and held on. I didn't expect it, but I didn't pull away either. I wrapped my arms around her and felt her body shaking against mine. We stood there in the dark kitchen, two broken hearts holding on to each other. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know where it was going. But in that moment, I felt something shift, something I couldn't name yet. Something that scared me, even as it pulled me closer to her. Living in that house again felt like being caught in a dream you couldn't wake up from. Not quite a nightmare, but heavy with the kind of silence that clings to your skin. My father's presence was everywhere. His scent still lingered faintly on the cushions of the living room sofa. His old leather recliner sat untouched, as if he might come home and collapse into it any second. The pictures on the walls, the baseball cap hanging by the door, the half-finished crossword puzzle on the nightstand, they all reminded me that this house once belonged to a man who could fill a room just by walking into it. But now it belonged to Emily and me, to people left behind, drifting in the same space, pretending we weren't drowning in the same grief. She moved softly, always barefoot, like walking too loudly might shatter what little was holding us together. We spoke when we had two small things, like who was cooking or what time the trash needed to go out, but the real conversations were the ones we weren't having. I noticed her more than I ever had before, not in a sexual way at first. It was more subtle than that. I noticed how she always lit a candle in the evenings, like the flicker of fire helped her breathe. I noticed she still wore his sweaters around the house, oversized and falling off one shoulder, like she was trying to hold on to something she couldn't touch anymore. I noticed how she'd pause in front of his photo in the hallway and gently run her fingers across the glass like she was tracing his memory. One night, a storm rolled in. The sky cracked open and poured rain over the roof like it was trying to wash us clean. I couldn't sleep, so I wandered downstairs for something to drink. I didn't expect to see her sitting alone at the kitchen island. A half-full glass of red wine in her hand, a soft playlist humming low in the background. She was wearing one of Dad's flannel shirts, the same one he always wore during winter, and nothing else that I could see. Her bare legs were crossed and her eyes were glassy, not from the wine, but from something deeper. Couldn't sleep either. She asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. I shook my head, poured myself a drink, and sat across from her. We didn't say much, just sipped and listened to the sound of rain. But when her hand reached out and gently brushed mine, something passed between us. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was loneliness. It was two people aching in the same direction. That night, I started seeing her differently. Not just as my stepmother, not just as Dad's widow, but as a woman. A woman who had loved, lost, and was still standing, barely, but standing. I started noticing the curve of her neck when she poured her coffee, the way her lips parted when she was deep in thought, the soft laugh she gave when I accidentally burned the toast. She wasn't trying to be anything to me, but she was becoming something anyway, something I wasn't sure I could handle. And late at night, when I lay in my bed and heard the sound of her soft crying through the wall, something inside me cracked. Not just from sadness, but from wanting to go to her, to hold her, to take her pain away the only way I knew how. It was wrong. I knew that, but it didn't stop the thoughts. It didn't stop the need. And in the quiet, grief-filled space between us, something was beginning. Something we hadn't asked for. Something neither of us was ready to admit. Something changed between us after that night in the kitchen. Something we didn't speak about, but both of us felt. The way she looked at me lingered a second longer. The way I leaned in to hear her voice, even when I didn't have to. We were both still walking through the fog of grief, but now we weren't walking alone. Emily started joining me on the couch in the evenings, and our talks got deeper. Not just about my dad, but about life, dreams, fears, regrets. We shared wine and stories, and sometimes we just sat there in silence. The flicker of the TV lighting up the room while neither of us really watched it. I found myself noticing everything about her, the softness of her voice, the way her fingers tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she curled up when she laughed like she was surprised her body still remembered how. She was beautiful, not in an obvious way, but in the quiet, steady way that made it impossible to look away. One night, after a second bottle of wine, we watched Casablanca, my dad's favorite. She curled up beside me, her legs tucked under a blanket, her head resting gently on my shoulder. I didn't move, couldn't. I was too aware of the warmth of her skin against mine. The slow rhythm of her breathing, the way she let out the softest sigh during the last scene. I hate how it ends, she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. Me too, I said. And then she looked up at me, really looked at me, and something in the air between us shifted. It was like time stopped. Eyes met mine, and for the first time there was no pretending we were just grieving. No pretending this was normal. Her hand found mine, soft and tentative, but deliberate. I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself nothing had happened. But something had, something unspoken and powerful. And 2 nights later, everything changed. It was after midnight. I was still awake, scrolling mindlessly through my phone when I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. I froze. Then the door opened slowly, and there she was, Emily standing in the dim hallway light, barefoot, wearing the same flannel shirt she'd had on that first night in. The kitchen? Her hair was messy, her face soft, unreadable. She didn't say anything. She just walked in and closed the door behind her. I sat up, unsure of what to say, but I didn't have to speak. She climbed into the bed beside me, pulled the blanket over us, and laid her head against my chest. My heart was racing. I didn't understand what was happening, but I didn't stop her. I couldn't. I wrapped my arm around her waist, and for a long time we just lay there, breathing, warm, quiet. Then her fingers slowly traced the line of my jaw, and she lifted her face to mine. Her lips met mine gently, as if asking a question she wasn't sure she should be asking. And when I kissed her back, I gave her the answer. It wasn't rough or wild, it was slow, emotional, like we were both afraid it would end before it even began. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Every touch, every kiss, every breath was its own confession. We were two people lost in the same ache, reaching out to each other in the dark. When morning came, nothing felt the same. She was still there beside me, eyes closed, her hand resting on my chest. And as the sun came through the window, I knew we had crossed a line we couldn't uncross. But in that moment, I didn't regret. I didn't feel guilt. I felt something else, something deeper. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was just the echo of grief. Either way, I wasn't ready to let her go. Asterisk, after that night, nothing was the same between us, but we pretended. Like it was. In the mornings, we acted normal. She'd make coffee, I'd cook eggs, and we'd talk about meaningless things like the weather or the grocery list. But underneath the surface, everything had changed. I could still taste her lips in every sip. Still feel the warmth of her skin against mine when she passed me the salt. We didn't speak of what happened that night, but we also didn't stay away from each other. Her late-night visits became quiet rituals. No words, just her slipping into my room after the lights were off, her body curling against mine like she belonged there. I never asked why she came, and she never explained. But we both knew it wasn't just about comfort. It was passion, raw, real, tangled with the pain we were both too scared to face out loud. Still, part of me wondered how we got here. She was my stepmother, my father's wife, and yet when I looked at her, all I saw was a woman aching to be held, to be understood, to feel alive again. But love built in the shadows never stays quiet for long. It was late one evening when I walked into the living room and found her on the couch crying quietly into her hands. Her body shook with a kind of sadness I hadn't seen before, deeper than grief, like something was breaking inside her. I sat beside her and gently touched her arm, but she pulled away. "You don't know everything," she said, her voice cracked and hollow. I asked her what she meant, and at first she said nothing. But then, like she couldn't carry the weight anymore, she spoke the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew. "Before your dad died," she whispered, "we weren't okay." We hadn't been okay for a while. I stared at her, confused, trying to process what she was saying. "He had an affair," she said flatly, staring at the floor. "I found out 6 months before he passed." My chest tightened. I didn't know whether to feel angry at my father or broken for her. Maybe both. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "Because I didn't want you to hate him. I didn't want to ruin what you had left of him." The room went quiet. The air felt heavy, like the truth itself was pressing down on us. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how much pain she had been carrying alone. I thought I had been the only one hurting. But her pain had layers I'd never imagined. Betrayal, loneliness, silence. "I stayed with him," she continued, "because I loved him. Even after what he did, I still loved him. But I stopped feeling like a wife. I just became someone he lived with." She finally looked up at me then, her eyes red but steady. "And then you moved in, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Like I mattered again." I reached for her hand, unsure of what to say, but she pulled it to her lips and kissed. it gently. "I didn't plan this," she whispered. "I swear I didn't." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The truth didn't push me away, it pulled me closer. Because for the first time I realized what this was between us. Not just comfort or lust, but something deeper. Something we didn't choose but couldn't ignore. That night, when she came to my room, it wasn't silent like before. She sat beside me, her fingers shaking slightly as she reached for mine. "If you want me to stop," she said, "say it now." I didn't say anything. Instead, I leaned forward and kissed her, slow, sure, full of everything I didn't have the words for. And as she melted into me, I knew this wasn't just about what we had lost. It was about what we were becoming together. In the dark, against all reason. The days that followed were a mix of quiet guilt and deep longing, like we were living in two separate worlds under the same roof. To the outside world, nothing looked different. But behind closed doors, everything had changed. Every glance between us carried weight, every touch was electric, every shared silence louder than words. We were no longer just two people mourning the same man. We were entangled in a secret we didn't fully understand. It was wrong. We both knew it. But it also felt like the only thing keeping us alive. At night, we gave in to it, to the PI. We gave in to it. We saw it, to the warmth of each other's bodies, to the whispers we shared in the dark, to the comfort we found in a place we never expected. Her skin became familiar to me, the curve of her hips, the softness of her breath in my ear. It was all burned into me like a secret I didn't want to let go. But during the day, we carried it in silence, afraid of what it meant. We didn't talk about love. We didn't talk about what would come next. Just kept walking the line between healing and disaster. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual and heard voices in the living room. I froze at the door, heart pounding. It was Emily and my Aunt Lisa, my dad's sister, who hadn't visited since the funeral. I stepped in casually, pretending I hadn't been listening, but the air was already tense. Lisa gave me that sideways look, the kind that says she sees more than she lets on. "You've been staying here long, huh?" she said, raising an eyebrow. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Emily's smile was tight, polite, forced. Something about Lisa's tone made my skin crawl. She stayed for only half an hour, but it felt like hours. The moment she left, Emily shut the door and let out a shaky breath. "She knows something," she said quietly. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how scared she was. Not of Lisa, but of what we were doing, of what it could cost. That night, I asked her what we were really doing. We sat on the back porch, a bottle of wine between us, the summer air thick and still. "Is this real?" I asked, not because I doubted the feelings, but because I needed to understand what came next. Emily looked at me, eyes wide, like I'd said something dangerous. She hesitated, then whispered, "I don't know." Her honesty hit harder than a lie ever could. "Sometimes I think this is all just grief," she continued, her voice shaking, "but then I'm with you. And it doesn't feel like grief. It feels like the first time I've been alive in years." Her words crushed something inside me and built something else in its place. I reached out, touched her cheek, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. Not the quiet tears I'd heard behind walls, but real, raw sobs. I held her, and in that moment I realized the weight we were both carrying, not just from losing him, but from finding each other in a way we never should have. Later in bed, she whispered something that stayed with me. "If your father could see us right now..." She didn't finish the sentence, and I didn't make her. Because the truth was, I didn't know how he'd react. Would he be furious? Would he understand? Or would he hate me for taking comfort in the arms of the woman he once loved? These questions haunted me, but they didn't stop me from holding her tighter. Because at the end of the day, we were already too deep. The line had been crossed, erased, and rewritten, and there was no turning back. It all came crashing down faster than we imagined. The quiet nights, The secret kisses, the stolen mornings, filled with soft touches and whispered promises, they weren't enough to keep the world out. Emily got a call one morning, her face turning pale the moment she saw the name flash across her screen. Lisa. I watched her answer it, her voice shaking, eyes darting toward me like she already knew what was coming. I couldn't hear both sides, but I could feel the storm through every stiff movement she made. When she hung up, she sat down on the edge of the couch, hands clenched in her lap. She knows, she said flatly, without even looking at me. She saw us. That day she visited. The way we looked at each other. She just didn't say anything until now. My stomach dropped. I felt exposed, like someone had ripped the curtain off the most vulnerable part of me. Emily stood up slowly, pacing the room like she needed to outrun the guilt. She threatened to tell your grandparents, the rest of the family. Said it was disgusting. Said your dad would be ashamed. I stayed silent, my hands curling into fists at my sides. I wanted to scream, not just at Lisa, but at fate, at life, at whatever cruel timing had brought us together in the worst way. But deep down, I knew this moment was always coming. You don't play with fire and expect not to get burned. That night was the last time Emily came to my room. She didn't crawl under the blanket. She didn't reach for me. She just sat beside me in silence, looking out the window, her voice low and fragile when she finally spoke. I love you, she said, but this us, it doesn't survive in the light. I tried to speak, to fight, but the words caught in my throat because I knew she was right. What we had was real, painfully real, but it couldn't breathe in a world that saw it as broken. You gave me something I thought I'd never feel again, she continued, eyes still fixed on the moonlight. You made me feel alive. You made me feel seen. I reached for her hand and she let me hold it just for a minute. But I'm not the woman you're supposed to build a life with, she whispered. I was your father's wife. Okay, no matter how twisted that title feels now, it's still part of this story. It's part of why we can't keep going. We didn't sleep that night. We just lay there, side by side, breathing together one last time. And when the morning sun came, she was already packing a bag. She said she needed to go away, not forever, but for long enough to make sense of her own heart. I didn't stop her. Couldn't. Because sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes. Love shows up in the wrong chapter of your life, at the wrong time, in the wrong skin. I stayed in the house a few more weeks, but it never felt like home again. Every room reminded me of her. The couch still smelled like her perfume, okay? The wine glass in the cabinet still had her lipstick stain, and her side of the bed. I never touched it. Eventually, I packed my things and left. No goodbye letter. No dramatic ending. It's just silence. The kind that hurts more than words. She texted me once, months later. Simple message, I hope you're doing okay. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because some love stories aren't meant to be continued. They're meant to be remembered like a secret you keep close to your heart, even when the world wouldn't understand. And maybe in some other life, we would have had a chance. But in this one, we were just two broken people who found each other in the dark and had to let go when the light came in.